December 24th, 1994. The world was in the midst of holiday celebrations. Families gathered, airports bustled with travelers, and there was a general air of joy. But at Houari Boumediene Airport in Algiers, Algeria, that festive spirit would soon be shattered by a brutal and calculated act of terror. Air France Flight 8969, scheduled to fly from Algiers to Paris, would become the center of a 3-day international crisis, a hijacking that tested the limits of negotiation, tactical response, and human courage. The aircraft, an Airbus A300, was operated by Air France and crewed by a seasoned team of professionals. On board were 220 passengers and 12 crew members. It was supposed to be a routine flight, but for 4 men who had boarded wearing Algerian police uniforms, it was anything but routine. These men were members of the Armed Islamic Group of Algeria, or GIA, a radical Islamist militant organization that had been responsible for a wave of violence during Algeria's brutal civil war. As passengers boarded, the 4 men blended in with airport security. Once on board, they revealed their weapons, Kalashnikov rifles, grenades, and explosives. The hijacking began swiftly and with brutal efficiency. Within moments, the terrorists had taken control of the plane. Panic spread through the cabin. People screamed, ducked under their seats, tried to call loved ones. The hijackers announced that they were seizing the aircraft in the name of their cause, and that unless their demands were met, passengers would die. Initially, their goals seemed vague. They demanded the release of jailed comrades and claimed they were protesting French support for the Algerian government. But as the hours ticked by, it became clear that this hijacking had a far more sinister objective. The terrorists did not intend to negotiate. Their true goal was to fly the plane to Paris and crash it, turning the Airbus A300 into a massive suicide bomb. This was 1994, nearly 7 years before 9/11, and the idea of using a commercial aircraft as a weapon was still almost unthinkable. The French and Algerian governments were immediately placed in a delicate position. Algeria was in the midst of a bloody civil war, and the government was hesitant to let French special forces operate on its soil. French intelligence, however, was adamant that the plane not be allowed to take off. They feared correctly that the hijackers had no intention of letting anyone survive. Inside the plane, the situation deteriorated. The terrorists began executing hostages to force the issue. Their first victim was an Algerian police officer, then a Vietnamese diplomat. Both were shot in the head and their bodies thrown from the plane onto the tarmac. These executions were meant to send a clear message. They were serious, and they were willing to kill. The passengers, now hostages in a flying prison, were subjected to constant fear and psychological torment. The cabin crew, especially the pilot, Captain Bernard Delhem, remained calm under pressure. They tried to maintain order, to reassure the passengers, and to buy time. The hijackers were unpredictable, sometimes preaching, sometimes silent, other times shouting and waving their weapons. They rewired the aircraft systems, prepared for a potential explosion, and even tried to convince the crew to fly to Paris. But France held firm. They refused to allow the aircraft to take off. As negotiations dragged on into a second and then a third day, international attention turned to Algiers. The media began covering the standoff around the clock. Families of the hostages waited helplessly, fearing the worst. French President François Mitterrand and Prime Minister Édouard Balladur were under intense pressure. They authorized the elite counter-terrorism unit GIGN, Groupe d'Intervention de la Gendarmerie Nationale, to prepare for a rescue operation. But there was a problem. The plane was still in Algiers, and the French could not act without Algeria's approval. Eventually, after protracted negotiations, the Algerian government allowed the plane to depart. The hijackers, believing they had won a victory, ordered the crew to fly to Paris. But due to low fuel levels, the plane first stopped in Marseille, a critical turning point in the drama. Now on French soil, the aircraft was surrounded by French special forces, snipers, and negotiators. The GIGN immediately took command of the situation. Marseille-Provence Airport was evacuated. GIGN operatives studied the aircraft, gathered intelligence from passengers who had been released, and began rehearsing a raid. They learned that the terrorists had placed explosives around the cockpit and had full control of the aircraft. The risk was enormous. A single spark could kill everyone on board. Over the next few hours, GIGN negotiators engaged in stalling tactics. They tried to buy more time to prepare. The hijackers, now growing impatient, fired shots from the aircraft, riddling the tarmac with bullets. They were clearly willing to escalate. When they began threatening to blow up the plane within minutes, the order was given. GIGN would storm the aircraft. On the evening of December 26, 1994, the rescue operation began. Under cover of darkness, GIGN operatives approached the aircraft in mobile stairs, heavily armored and bulletproof. Their strategy was to attack from multiple entry points simultaneously. As they got into position, the terrorists opened fire, piercing the airport with the deafening sound of automatic gunfire. A full-blown gun battle erupted. Inside the plane, chaos. Passengers ducked, screamed, clung to their seats. Smoke grenades filled the cabin. The GIGN used flashbangs to disorient the hijackers. Over the next 20 minutes, the aircraft became a war zone. One by one, the terrorists were cornered and neutralized. Passengers were evacuated, some crawling, some carried out by commandos. Captain Delhem and his crew remained until the very last moment, ensuring everyone got off safely. The battle left the plane riddled with bullet holes, but the passengers were alive. The hijackers, all four, were dead. Miraculously, out of the 232 people on board, only 3 hostages had been killed during the standoff. Several GIGN operatives were wounded, but there were no further fatalities. The raid was hailed as a textbook example of counterterrorism. The GIGN operatives were lauded as heroes. Captain Delhem and the cabin crew were celebrated for their bravery, calm, and leadership under pressure. The French government had successfully thwarted a terrorist attack that could have rivaled the worst aviation disasters in history. In the aftermath, investigators confirmed the hijackers' original plan: to crash the plane into the Eiffel Tower or another high-profile target in Paris. Their mission was not about negotiation. It was a suicide attack. France had narrowly avoided a mass casualty tragedy. Air France Flight 8969 became a turning point in how governments and intelligence agencies thought about aviation security. It was a grim preview of tactics that would later become all too familiar in the 21st century. In response, France ramped up airport security, revised its counterterrorism protocols, and invested in rapid response capabilities. The incident also highlighted the growing threat posed by extremist ideologies crossing borders. The GIA, though based in Algeria, had shown that its ambitions extended far beyond North Africa. In the years that followed, many of its members would be linked to larger, more global jihadist networks, including Al-Qaeda. To this day, Air France Flight 8969 is studied in military and law enforcement circles around the world. It is remembered not only for the horror and fear that gripped its passengers, but also for the courage and precision of the rescue that followed. It serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly normal life can be disrupted, and how critical it is to be prepared for the unexpected. But beyond the military strategy and political consequences, the human stories endure. Passengers who survived often speak of the kindness of strangers, of holding hands with people they'd never met before, of praying together in different languages, of the moments of unity found in shared fear. Flight attendants who shielded children, pilots who negotiated with guns at their heads. These are the stories that linger, proof that in the face of terror, human resilience endures. It's been decades since that harrowing Christmas in 1994. The scars remain for those who lived through it, but so does the knowledge that in a moment of crisis, bravery, discipline, and unity prevailed. Air France Flight 8969 didn't end the way the hijackers had planned. Their plan was defeated, not only by bullets and tactics, but by courage, calm, and resolve.